Hello, my name is Paul Hunziker. I'm going to be working with you today on ways to engage families utilizing motivational interviewing skills. Tiny bit of background on me. So I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and a substance use disorder professional in the state of Washington. Being a marriage and family therapist, I'm trained in systems thinking. I'm also an approved Association of Marriage and Family Therapy approved supervisor. So I also work with folks on developing systemic thinking. And I have been studying motivational interviewing since 2007 and was inducted into the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers in 2014 in Atlanta. I've been training with the Northwest Addiction Technology Transfer Center since 2015 in several things, including supervision, but also motivational interviewing and also family systems related topics. So let's get right to what the presentation is about today. So let me share my screen here. Oops. All right, so there's some information on me here. So I start out every presentation I do with this slide. It comes from the ATTC. So it's to discuss the fact that we want to use affirming language as much as possible. Now, to define affirming language, it's defined by being individualized. So we'll adjust our language based on what the person that we're working with prefers. It's also person first. So person first would be going in here stating that they are a person, that they are not their addiction or mental health condition, whichever it is or that we're working with. So this would say, you'll notice I won't say someone who's an addict or an alcoholic. I will instead say someone with a substance use disorder, or if I know the exact substance, alcohol use disorder or cannabis use disorder. On the mental health side, you'll hear me say someone who has bipolar or someone who's recovering from bipolar. That's again using the person first language. We also want to make sure our language is as scientifically accurate as possible, hence the substance use disorder or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder instead of ADD, because that's technically not scientifically accurate because the name is ADHD. And then the last part of affirming language is that we really seek to connect rather than isolate. So again, we're not trying to label, we're trying to name when folks are part of a community or where they're connected together, or laying that in somehow to that and orienting it towards recovery. So we will be utilizing this as we go in, and the purpose behind this again is to stamp out stigma, because language is one of the last things that is holding stigma up in place. So I need to note with this training, scope of practice. So this is a scope of practice disclaimer. So reading the material out here, because it's kind of a wordy slide here. So some of the material in this training may be out of the scope of practice of some participants. We've made sure to include information which is accessible to all practitioners. We'll also work to point out where scope of practice may be an issue and how to work with different scopes. However, if you're not certain whether techniques in this training are in your scope, please consult with your supervisor before utilizing the material. So just making sure we're venturing into family systems work, and as you likely know, this requires some training. However, there are aspects of this that are still utilized even if you don't have systems training or not. It's not within your scope to be utilizing those skills. All right, so that out of the way. What you'll see in front of you, if you're familiar with motivational interviewing, if you have MI training, which hopefully you have, you'll notice the 4 processes that are involved with motivational interviewing. I've got engaging highlighted, because again, this is called engaging families using motivational interviewing. And so much of what we're doing is trying to make sure that we're engaged. Now, within engaging, there are 3 questions that we need to ask ourselves. And I'm going to skip ahead with that so that we'll be reviewing that in just a moment. So there are 3 questions, I'll allude to them now, are: is every family member comfortable working with me? Do I seem to understand the perspective of most family members, and ideally the whole family? And does this feel collaborative? Does everybody feel like they're on board with working with this, or are there members that maybe aren't? And you see how those are slight changes to the conversation that we have going forward with this. So the next phase, and I'll run through the other 4 phases with focusing. Now, when we're thinking family-wise, focus can also be tricky because what we're trying to negotiate is a singular focus, and family members may have differing agendas. What's important and helpful with this within MI when we're using it with an individual is that we really slow down and we make sure that we spend a lot of time negotiating the focus that helps us clarify what we're working on, but also makes absolutely sure that we're all getting on the same page. This can be incredibly helpful within MI, within working with families. One of the things that we will introduce in a moment is a big part of family therapy is generating what's called a hypothesis of what you think is going on. I encourage folks, if you're working with this, to negotiate the hypothesis and come into it in a curious way and work with the family and see if you can come to a collaborative agreement on what the hypothesis of the problem is. That will get you to a focus using MI and with families. From there, you're going to be evoking, and we're going to talk about different skills like circular questioning that will really help deepen the conversation, especially in the evoking process, to pull out and to really gather everybody's perspective and deepen each other's understanding within the family of how they work as a family unit, and also how their actions affect each other. The last part with this is going to be looking at planning. And what you would do with this is you're putting together a plan that the family sees as valuable. And it really is, with this, it's so important for them to be on board with that plan. So that's laying it out there, kind of going in. And again, with MI, we say, can it be MI without engaging? No. Can it be MI without focusing? Absolutely not. Can it be MI without evoking? No. Can it be MI without planning? Definitely. And this follows with family therapy as well. We don't need to necessarily plan. We just are helping them examine things, and they will likely come up with their own plans, especially if they're thinking of things differently and they see things differently. That is one of the ways, the advantages of utilizing this. Looking at MI again as a whole. One of the great parts with this is that you can put it all on one worksheet. You can't do that with family therapy, and we'll talk about that because there's a lot of different ideas and different theories within family therapy. But I will pull out some of the tenets going in and figure out how we can match them. So looking at this really quickly here, spirit. So familiarize yourself with the fact that there's partnership. It's a collaboration between 2 experts. In fact, when it's family, it's a collaboration of many experts. It also has to be a collaboration. You have to be working together all in unison simultaneously, as opposed to some people not, some people working harder. Acceptance. Having unconditional positive regard for every single family member, no matter what they're doing and how they're working. And this can be challenging because when we're working with families, it can draw out behaviors that make it really hard to figure out how to have a positive view of that person. And so this is a really important piece of recognizing that even though they're doing something that's really frustrating right now, how do I come to a place that I hold them in positive regard? A tip I have is always trying to remember at least one thing that I like about the person that helps reorient me and bring me back to this point of being able to sit there with them with that. Accurate empathy is a huge part of acceptance as well. And that's tricky with families because we want to have accurate empathy, and sometimes family members will react when we have that. And we'll talk more about that as we go because that's another piece that needs to be paid attention to. Compassion, always having the family's best interests at heart. Evocation, really drawing and seeing if you can gather each member's point of view and always remaining curious about what else is in the family. What are we missing? What haven't we seen? 4 processes I reviewed quite extensively on the last slide. Change talk. Change talk is here going in, and it's the same as it is with individual. You've got preparatory change talk with the desire, ability, reason, and need, and then commitment with commitment, activation, taking steps. Darn cats is the acronym. This can go and recognizing that sustained talk and change talk can be in different members of the family. You sometimes see one side talking a ton about change, the other side not talking about it at all and talking about a lot of sustain. That's common. And so you're going to be working with that. That's one of the differences you can see here. And then we have the core skills. So you've got open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. And the last part here, elicit, provide, elicit, which is an MI consistent way of giving advice. We're going to look at those quite extensively during this exercise. All right, so a quick recap of family therapy. So basic important tenets that are concepts that are foundational to all family systems approaches. So always this concept that the family is greater than the sum of its individual parts. And that's the heart of systems thinking, is that when you put together all the components of a family, members, it makes something more than what each member, the sum of just each member being put together is. It's similar to thinking of laying out all the parts of a car on the ground and then seeing the car together. I don't know about you, but I would say that all the car parts put together make something greater than just all of those parts laying out on the ground, to give you an understanding. And that's the idea behind systems. Homeostasis, kind of a big word here. So homeostasis is the idea that things will tend to want to return to their what quote, quote, normal state or calm state. And so there will be tendencies within families when things get elevated, say emotions, there might be controls that come in to figure out how to clamp down on that and bring the emotions down. Or if the family is really reactive and really likes to have a lot of excitement, anything that starts to kind of drag them down and calm them down is going to likewise be attacked or addressed and bring things back up. So again, remembering it goes to that normal state there. Looking at, and this is a part that's important to family therapy, not taking for granted that the behaviors have what everyone thinks their meaning is. They can serve another purpose. How this goes is basically an example of a child acting out could be serving the purpose of bringing the parents together in a rough marriage or a marriage that's not doing well, so that they can unify together and actually, in coming together, they forget their differences, and the child acting out serves the purpose of actually holding the family together. So that would be just one example. There can be many others. And then helper must be seen as completely neutral arbiter. So let's look at that a little bit more in a moment here. So neutrality is called equipoise in MI. Equipoise comes from the medical field, and it's a word for doctors not wanting to have influence on a decision. And so in MI, one of the things going in is that first and foremost, you want to be transparent that you're being neutral, or you're holding a position of equipoise, which automatically means that you're using it at limited times. The reason why you want to be neutral or want to use it limited is because it tends to create discomfort. So when someone sits with you and doesn't take any position at all, it forces you to take both positions and really examine both positions. That can be extremely uncomfortable. That can drive your anxiety up very high. And if you sit with someone for too long, and especially if you haven't told them that you're being neutral, it really can get their emotions to a point that are really problematic. So that's why you do that. Now, the reason why we might decide to do this in MI is that someone may be wrestling with a decision that you don't want to have any fingerprints on. Whether to get a divorce. Nope. No, I, as a clinician, do not want them to ever feel like I push them in any particular direction with that, either in or out. Whether or not to keep a child, same setup. I never want them coming home and saying, Paul talked me into this. That would be horrible. And so that would be times when we're really being truly neutral. Now, to be MI consistent, you would really lay this out and say to folks, just so you know, I'm really going to be neutral here. That may cause some discomfort, and we can talk about that as it comes in. But I want to make sure you know that I'm not invested in either side of this. I want to help you explore both sides. So that would be there, and it's a very specific decision made within motivational interviewing. So neutrality with this going in, so neutrality, sorry. All right, coming back again. So let's go back into the slides here. So neutrality, and still looking at this within now family therapy. So neutrality is actually seen as absolutely essential within family therapy. So the family must perceive the therapist as neutral. Reason is that anything other than neutral is going to make it look like you're taking sides with one of the members, or possibly even a subgroup within that group. And that means you're going to lose effectiveness, because there are going to be members that don't feel like you're on their side, that are going to discredit you and not take the information in. And it can actually lead to really unethical situations where if you're not neutral, you do really dive in, and there are some gnarly situations that have occurred from that where people lost their neutrality. You want to make sure as well that you're allied with everyone at the same time and no one at the same time. So you are on the side of the family, not on the side of any individual or any subgroup. And that ends up meaning that you're non-judgmental and accepting of everyone, and trying to figure out how to stay in that middle ground. It is absolutely essential there. Yeah, it does potentially create discomfort. That is an important piece, and it's still noted within this. And we're going to mention that in a moment, that the discomfort is actually looked at as an opportunity. So from this neutral stance, we want to ask questions of each and every member. We're going to be looking at how to try as best as we can to spend equal time on each member. That will help with that neutral piece. And then what you may do, because they're sitting in a circle around you, of course, with COVID, it's going to be a little bit different because they're online in little boxes here. But you can still go around each member as though they're in a circle and ask the same type of question to each of them to show that it's equal. Frequently, it's the exact same question. The purpose around this is to explore and investigate each person's perspective and perception. And you can use MI skills while doing this. Ask them a question, reflect back, kind of deepen it, and to draw them out and to draw their perception out even further. So we see this slide again here with the engaging piece. I'll repeat in here that engaging is the foundation. It's everything. The 3 questions. So really, and that's understood, that underline there saying comfortable. How comfortable is each member in speaking with me? Is it feeling as though they feel like I'm simultaneously on their side and no one's side at the same time? Are they seeing that neutrality and appreciating it? Those are all parts of that comfortableness. And then, do I understand each member's perspective and concern? And this ties in with the collaborative piece. Are we all working together to really see and define what the problem is? And are we on the same page as to what the problem is? Am I being transparent enough? Am I being able to bring my thoughts into this and have them examined and tested by the family? Is the family bringing thoughts forward? If it's free and open, like I'm talking about here, you're in a really solid place. You've got good engagement with that entire family. If you don't, then the task really is, how do I get to that place? So if you've got a really high conflict situation, there's something off with one of these most likely. And that's an important piece to recognize, because so much of the work within family work is engaging and getting everybody in the room and on the same page. Frequently, when we do that, the rest of the work frequently falls in place on its own, because the family does so much connecting with each other outside the session. They tend to move forward with it. Just being able to engage and get on the same page is a huge part of the work. So this question here, how might culture affect motivational interviewing practice with families? So I'll note from this as well, and I do need to speak from the fact that, yep, I am a white male, and so I am at a, I don't know, I was about to say disadvantage, but I have to note that I have a specific perspective on this, and so please take that into account. I can speak to the fact that I've had conversation. When I was in Atlanta, I was fortunate enough to have Bill Miller came in and talked with our group of trainers, and we actually asked him about culture. And what he said was that they've had great success with every time they've been able to get someone from inside the culture to utilize the skills, which is an important piece to note, because going in, that means that you have to find someone trained from within that culture, train them in the skills, get them to a proficient level, and then see how it goes. And they usually get good results. That's a good sign that the theory itself works across cultures, though it also leaves us in an awkward place, because most of us have to work across cultures. And the data is mixed on this. And part of this is so much of engaging, and so much of gaining trust is learning and understanding the deeper meaning, the deeper purpose, and so much of that lies and is embedded within our cultural worldview. And so it's really, really challenging to reach over from your own cultural worldview and understand another's cultural worldview. At the same time, if we slow down enough and use our reflections and spend a lot of time clearing our mind to really see the client as best as we can, we're probably going to do a pretty good job. It may not be perfect, and I unfortunately, we need to do more work on figuring out how to do this better, but it is going to give us a leg up. Of course, there's going to be certain things, like I just mentioned, I'm a white male counselor. There's going to be folks that are going to have a hard time with that. I may have a person of color come into my room, and they're going to cherry pick and pick what to say because they don't know how I'm going to react. It's on me to figure out in ways I do it of acknowledging that piece and that I'm coming from a place of privilege and going in. I also can't guarantee that I won't react to things. As I'm learning for myself over the years, there's different things I react to, and it's like, oh, okay, I've come up against something. I've got a new piece of learning that I need to undertake. And so that's an important part of being humble and being open to taking information in. But the cultural piece really with engaging is so essential. It underlies everything. It's the foundation. And really MI helps because it focuses on that. And because MI is so focused on a therapeutic relationship, that when there's an offshoot, hopefully through our skills, we become really sensitive to that and are able to ferret that out and figure out a way through that. Of course, I probably have missed sections on culture because it's such a huge topic. If you know more, please work with that and go forward with that. All right, coming back to the slides. So we've got the ORs. So we've got open-ended questions. affirmations, reflections, and summaries. Purpose of this slide here is to show that that boat has no oars, it has no engine. So the oars really within MI are how we actually get anywhere. They are what move us forward. They are what propel the interaction forward. I'm going to focus on open-ended questions because it is something that's we try to reduce, but we try to reduce the number of questions because questions can tend to shut conversation down, and that's why we try to move towards reflection. Though with families, you're probably going to look to questions a little bit more because there's going to be times when you do need to lead more than you might in an individual session. But it is still really important that you use open-ended questions because that will help with bringing folks forward. So meeting these requirements here, gathering broad perspective or descriptive information. Try to get people more talkative because it's hard to answer these with yes or no or one word. Usually we start general with the family and move to more specific as we go along. The goal here is to really let the client or the person that you're asking the question to set the agenda. Questions I would go into here or how we start open-ended questions. How, tell me about, what, and describe are ways that we put forward with that. Now, one of the questions that's on here is why. And when I do just a traditional motivational interviewing training, I talk about how why is actually okay within MI, as long as you have solid engagement. We usually are trained that the question of why is a problem because it will generate a defensive reaction. If we have solid rapport and we're not in the engagement phase, that's solid and that's taken care of, or that's at least for the moment. Why can be an incredibly rich question because it can really and if they don't have that, what are you doing response, it can drop them down even further. Problem with families. It's harder to get out of the engagement phase. And if not everybody's there or there's any sense of frustration because they're probably asked why by, say it's a kid with their parents, they're probably asked why frequently. And that can then engender the defensive response or possibly make it feel like you're taking sides. So I would tend to not use why a lot with families. But of course, it's going to be a judgment call there because there can be some utility to it. All right. So what I'm going to do now, so there's a vignette. And I'm going to work through this vignette with you. Normally we would be doing this in person and we'd be working on the worksheets here. But due to COVID, we're going to be doing this a little bit different. So I'm going to read out this case scenario. And with this case scenario, I'm going to show you some potential open-ended questions that you might come up with. So the case scenario is as follows. So this is Daniel. He's a 17-year-old male who was removed from his biological mother's care at the age of 3 and placed into foster care due to physical abuse in the home. Daniel's foster parents have brought him into family counseling at the recommendation of his school and his PO. He is often truant from school, and when he is at school, typically ends up in some type of aggressive altercation with peers. This has resulted in an assault charge for which he is on probation. Daniel manipulates to get what he wants per foster parents' report, and when he is told no, will run from the home and commit various offenses, which typically results in him being picked up by the police. Daniel reports he is only coming to counseling because of his PO and states it's for crazy people. He has been given a diagnosis of major depression and provisional PTSD. Medications have been prescribed, but he takes them infrequently. He says he does not like the way they make him feel. His foster parents state that they are committed and dedicated to helping him, but are often tired and ill-equipped to handle Daniel's daily struggles. So Daniel's and his foster parents are here for their 3rd counseling session. Daniel has said he's doing better at school this week, but the truant designation really bothers him. His foster parents are still concerned that he's going to have problems. Daniel is met with his PO, but doesn't like the way his PO talks to him. The PO is very strict. Daniel hopes counseling will help him figure out how to get out of the legal system. His parents are always asking him how he's doing, but he just doesn't have anything great to say, and they end up getting mad at him. So, looking at some possible open-ended questions, and now we need to think of open-ended questions that we might ask both Daniel and his foster parents, because that's what we're imagining are in the room right now. So with Daniel, you might go into the fact that, so tell me more about this goal of getting out of the legal system. You could then expand that out to the parents of, yeah, what would it mean for you to actually have Daniel out of the legal system? How important is it for you to have Daniel out of the legal system is another way you could go about it. So other things we can look at is the fact of medications. So tell me more about what's going on with the medications, or describe what the medications do is another way of going potentially for that. And he may go to the negative and talk about what's negative, and then ask to the parents, what is your perspective on this? When Daniel takes the meds, what do you see? You're probably going to get some differences. You might get more of the balance. And then you can draw that back to Daniel. If they say, hey, he's calmer, he doesn't do a lot, he doesn't end up leaving like he does when he's not taking the meds. Daniel, what are your thoughts on that? So come back to that, and you could utilize this going in. So other pieces going in, remembering when we ask questions, we want to be able to ask them to each member. We're not going to ask them to just one member. It's the purpose here is to get everybody's perspective before you move anywhere with anything. The PO, yeah, you could talk about that, the PO frustrates him. Now, with the parents, you might also look at, and some questions here that could run deeper. A question might be to the parents, when you look at the other foster placements that you've had, where does Daniel kind of fit? Yeah, that's pretty forward. I honestly have a little bit of concern with this, that it's an unstable placement. And I'm wondering whether Daniel's thinking that. So if he is, and it is an unstable placement, it's just bringing to the forefront what's actually going on. If I'm wrong, great. Then I know it's a solid placement. They're not thinking anything of it. Then going in, now I might stretch that back because you're going to want to think to whether or not of a way to ask Daniel about it. And say, and you could switch it to, Daniel, how are you feeling at the house? Does it feel like it's a place that you're going to be able to stay? So, all right, coming back. All right. So, yeah, let's just start left off with questions around the placement. Now, we could also ask parents potentially about, do they feel they're feeling powerless? And so asking about this, of tell me more about what in feeling powerless, because you've done foster placements before, but this one is making it feel different. Tell me about what feels different. And then laying back to Daniel of, okay, now that you've heard them saying how they feel stuck, what are your thoughts? So hopefully it's becoming obvious about how you can take this, though when you add questions and ask questions, you want to make sure that that's there and recognize that there's an audience. Because there are some times, especially that one question of asking Daniel about, or Daniel's parents or foster parents about the placement and whether it's solid. Daniel's the audience to that. And we're thinking about how that's going to potentially impact him. So yeah, that's another piece that you need to add in here. is thinking critically about this. So those are some examples there of some potential open-ended questions that you can ask. All right, so coming back, I'm going to show some more slides here. So one thing that's very specific to family therapy are circular questions. Circular questions are a significant part of this, and they came out of the MRI group, and they've been around. Some of the articles you look at are from the 1980s. They were actually started in the 60s and 70s. And actually, circular questions dovetail pretty nicely with MI. Circularity, hence the foundation of circular questions. We call it the circular interview when you're going through and utilizing circular questions. So it's an assessment focused on relational features of the family. It will specifically examine similarities and differences in perspective. So it's not a formal, like, sit down, heavy duty, like a drug and alcohol evaluation, or one for if they get a DUI or something like that. It's really just us sitting and asking questions and assessing. Here, we're assessing for what the hypothesis, what is the root of the problem? And we're doing that in a very conversational style. Though we're also really, as family therapists, we focus a lot on the interactions, the nonverbals that are happening, also the order of who talks and who says what, and what reactions come out of other people when something is said. The second sentence will specifically examine similarities and differences in perspective. So we're really looking for what is the same, who has the same perspective, what perspectives are allowed, who has different perspectives, and how do the other members treat them based on their perspective. And the questions will help pull that out. So the purpose of this, we want to introduce the family to a systemic view of itself. We want to develop, confirm, or deny your hypotheses. So your hypotheses are the ones that you have as the counselor, but here it might also be the family ones, trying to look at and study and see if your hypothesis is correct or not. It also gives us a chance to intervene indirectly when an opportunity is missed by the family. We could express appreciation. So if something's happened and no one's appreciated it, you could stop and say, hey, that's a great job. I mean, and we could add an affirmation in there of the fact that you stood up and held your ground is commendable. Also allowing independence in there. So that would be a piece systemically where if we feel like there's actions going on within the family that are undercutting someone's independence, like not allowing them to think on their own, not allowing them to act on their own, or if, say, the child is a late teen and they're kind of being held back, we might stand in and prop them up. Or if the mom isn't being respected, or vice versa, anyone in the family. Helping a child learn a desired trait through modeling. So we might also intervene and actually try to act out or engage in the behavior that we think is appropriate or that would be helpful for that child to learn. And then we also use circularity to examine the effectiveness of attempted solutions to their situation. So with keys and guidelines, so we want to think only in terms of relationships. So this is, again, a family thing. When you're working individually, you may not think this, and if it's outside your scope, you may not. Though in here, the reason why we do this in terms of differences and changes in behavior in family members across time. So we're really trying to focus only on how the interactions go. Are they going well, or what's actually happening with the interactions? It's more about the pattern than what's actually being said. I want to ask questions of each member, not spending too much time on any single person. So that's a repeat from before going in. We also want to ask about issues that are relevant to the problem or to your hypothesis. So this is again where we're hypothesis testing. Similar when in MI, when we use reflection, it's about hypothesis testing. Some examples that you might see with circular questioning, some general examples, would be that Carol, who in this family thinks that this is a problem? So you're noting, you're taking someone out and singling them out to see who and see what their perspective is on who thinks this is an issue. Also remember that the folks in the family will be watching and see what Carol thinks. Tay, who in this family thinks this isn't a problem? So flipping that on its head, but it's not you can follow up easily with this, but you can pick who to ask this. So what are your thoughts when your dad says that? Another example going in, trying to bring out the internal experience out into the forefront, because frequently within families, it just stays silent. And that is the idea here, is to bring the perspective forward, because it has probably been missed at some point. Mohammed, who's the most motivated person in the room? So that, again, goes in and just asks who they feel is most active. So hopefully here you're seeing some of these examples of how you're asking kind of across who thinks what. You may go around and ask the same question to other members too. That's a very possible feature going in here. But you can also see how these are all open-ended questions. All of these examples are open-ended. And so they would fit within that MI perspective. They're adding another piece on of trying to deepen the conversation in between other people. So we're coming to the end of the first part. What we will have in the second portion, we're going to see a video example of some circular questioning. We're also going to see some examples of ways to use this if you're not a family therapist. So I know this has been very family therapy heavy so far. We're going to add some more parts on. And we're also going to add some features in here that will help manage some of the discomfort that may come up, because it will potentially, there's a risk for there to be discomfort. You can see from some of these examples where people may react pretty strongly if this were to be utilized. All right, so I look forward to seeing you for the second half.